On this episode, we cover the Joe Rogan Experience 1599 with guest Tulsi Gabbard. The No Rogan Experience starts now. Welcome back to the show. It's a show where two podcasters with a full 200 hours of Joe Rogan Experience get to know one Joseph Rogan. 200 hours of this now. It's a show for anyone who's curious about Joe Rogan, his guests, and the claims that they're making, as well as anyone who just wants to understand Joe's ever-growing media influence. I'm Michael Marshall. I'm joined as ever by Cecil Cicirello. And today we're going to be covering Joe's January 2021 interview with Tulsi Gabbard. So, Cecil, how did Joe introduce Tulsi in the show notes here?
It says Tulsi Gabbard is a former United States representative, presidential candidate, and Iraq war veteran. Currently, she serves as the leader of the Tulsi Aloha, a political action committee.
Okay, now I don't know a great deal about Tulsi Gabbard. She's not a huge figure here in the UK. So is there anything else we ought to know about Tulsi Gabbard?
Yeah, I mean, so she's got something of a pretty interesting past. She was a member of the Hawaii state legislature in the very early aughts. And while she was serving, she joined the National Guard. Then she resigned her position there and when she was deployed to Iraq for 12 months. Then she went to officer school and became a lieutenant colonel. She decided to run for a seat in Congress in Hawaii in 2011, and when the person in her district decided to run for Senate. And her district was a very blue district. So a pretty left-leaning district with a lot of left-leaning ideology. And she wound up winning that district. And it appears she adopted a lot of that ideology, right? A lot of that ideology became sort of her personality. She is also someone who was very young and a vet. And the Democrats love when they can claim a soldier just because of optics, you know, because most of those soldiers sort of belong to the right in this country. So if there is a soldier, the Democrats often will go crazy for them. And they did for Tulsi. In fact, she was one of the rising stars of the Democratic Party around this point. And she eventually ran for president. But she made a lot of questionable decisions, like meeting with the Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad. And that was a big deal. He was, at that point, literally a dictator. And she had a conversation with him. And she said, we should always be open to talking to people. And I think people would agree that, yes, you should be open to talking to people. But really, you're sort of giving those people your approval in some way. By meeting with them, you're sort of validating them. And that's a bad thing to do.
Legitimizing them, yeah.
Yeah, so that's what she did while she was in office. She spent a lot of time on Fox News. She had a lot of talking points that were very Fox News-esque. She was very anti-Islamic. She had a lot of anti-Islamic points, and she was very anti-interventionist wars, which is different than Fox News. Fox News is normally pretty hawkish, but she didn't seem to be anti-war so much as she was anti-American soldier death. And that's a very different thing, because that's not just anti-death in general. That's anti-one sort of thing. And so there's a really interesting take that she has there. But she brought it to Fox News, and they broadcasted her, which is, I think, why she decided to run for president. When Donald Trump was impeached the second time, or the first time, she just voted present. She actually didn't vote in that particular when they called people together to vote on that. She didn't win the nomination for president. And this podcast is actually taking place, you said 2021, it's actually taking place a couple weeks after she stepped down from Congress. So it was a couple of weeks afterwards. Important notes here, she grew up in a religion called the Science of Identity Foundation, which is like one Kevin Bacon away from the International Society for Krishna Consciousness.
Yeah.
She has very strong ties to this group. Her dad is an anti-gay activist. He founded the organization Stop Promoting Homosexual Hawaii, Stop Promoting Homosexual International, and the Alliance for Traditional Marriage and Values. And Gabbard had some complicated views about trans people and gay people throughout her past. She's been flipping back and forth. And it really feels like, if you look at her past, that she's doing it depending on how she needs to present herself to the public. Very specifically, I'm talking about when she ran, she needed to present herself as a very left-leaning candidate. She has since changed her views pretty dramatically on those types of things. Now, obviously, there's a lot more to say about Tulsi Gabbard and her past. There are some really good deep dives in sort of the similar vein of our podcast in a lot of ways that go into this. I'm going to put links in the show notes to QAnon Anonymous. They did a two-parter on her.
Yeah.
And Marsh tipped me off to that one. And then Worst Year Ever. This is Robert Evans and a couple other people talk about her for about an hour and a half. And they go through her past. They're both really good. So you can check them out in the show notes.
Okay, cool. And what did Tulsi talk about with Joe here?
Well, they talked about the things that Tulsi wants the world to know about her. She's anti-cancel culture. She's anti-culture war. She's pro-free speech. And that both sides, super, super bad.
That is a thing she will say very, very clearly. So our main event this week is actually going to be about the January 6th insurrection. This conversation takes place like 2 weeks or so after Jan 6th. And so there's a lot of reaction from her, and we get to see a lot of reaction from Joe as to what he felt about Jan 6th at the time. That's going to be the main event for the show this week. Before we get into that main event, we do want to say a huge thank you to our Area 51 All Access Pass patrons. Those are Megan Bray, Left Hand Voodoo, Billionaire Oligarchs, Lucy Cortez, Ramtam Tickler, Morgan Gordon, Stargazer 97, Scott Laird, Carissa Gunderson, Darlene, Matthew Cutler Autistic Twitch Streamer, Stoned Banana, Angie Matke, Laura Williams, no, not that one, the other one, Cindy Lynch, yes, that's Cindy Lynch, Chunky Cat in Chicago has had enough of this BS, Cecil stole Marsh from the PIAT when they had dibs, Fred R. Gruthius, Dr. Andrew Gibson, online physics tutor. Don't thank me, your show is just worth investment. And apparently a new patron here. Help me, no Rogan Kenobi. You're my only podcast now that knowledge fight is gone. Who will warm me of the sex robots?
I don't know who will warm you, but you definitely want to warm your sex robot.
Warm your sex robot first.
You gotta like run it under warm water or put it in a warm room for a while.
Preheat in the oven. Go in cold. Absolutely. Those are the keys to sex robots. So they all subscribe to patreon.com/no Rogan. You can do that too. All of our patrons, you're going to get early access to every episode. You're going to get that ad-free. Plus, you'll get a special Patreon-only bonus show every single week, a bonus segment from this show. This week's bonus segment, Joe and Tulsi are going to tell us how relieved they are that Trump is very firmly in the rearview mirror now. Yeah, you can check that out at patreon.com/no Rogan.
Yikes.
Now it's time for our main event.
It's time. It's time. It's time. It's time.
Huge thank you to this week's veteran voice of the podcast. That was Elaine, Donate to Women's Foundation of Minnesota, announcing our main event. We highly, highly endorse that message. Remember that you too can be on the show by sending us a recording of you giving us your best rendition of It's Time. You can send that to noroganpod@gmail.com, as well as how you want to be credited or what cause you want to be supporting.
Like Marsh said, this is a lot of talk about January 6th. And like Marsh said, it's happening. It's 15 days after. It releases 15 days after, which means this conversation happened prior to that. Yep. There's a lot you can talk about, a lot you can mention about that time. I'll mention that at that point they had impeached Donald Trump, I think, or they had called him up for a vote to impeach him. There was people on the both left and right giving very, very forceful speeches against Donald Trump at that point. And a lot of people in the country at that point were very, very worried about a possible civil war, about the difficulties that happened that day. There's a lot going on. And I actually think that this conversation is really, really calm compared to what was happening in much of the media at that point.
Oh, yeah.
So we're going to
listen. You say, this is 8 days after Trump was impeached for the second time.
Yeah.
He was impeached on the 13th of January. So like 8 days later, 2 weeks after the insurrection, a week after the impeachment, this is the conversation Joe and Tulsi are having.
Yeah. So here we go.
And one of the things that people said about the Patriot Act is that when they were talking about mass surveillance and the things that Snowden revealed and some of the things that the NSA were doing, if you got a guy in office that you love, like Obama, and you think it's going to be fine because he's in office, understand that there's a guy that's probably going to be there in 4 years or in 8 years that is not going to be your friend.
Exactly.
It's not going to be who you like, and he's going to have access to those same laws. This is why it's so important that we not change these laws. This is why it's so important that we don't give the government massive ability to just look into your emails and listen to your voicemails.
Yeah. And why it's so important for us, especially now, to stand up for freedom of speech,
yes,
for freedom of the press, for that exact reason. And that's what's so disturbing about a lot of what we've seen starting to play out over the last week or two, with an increasing call for people to say, well, you know, maybe we need to start shutting down certain new media entities that are promoting or saying things we don't like, or shutting down people's Twitter accounts because they're saying things that we don't like. This is a double-edged sword. And you think that you're putting these things in place because you know, it's a good thing. It's a good thing because you only want to hear from people who you agree with. But as you said, those tables can very quickly and will likely turn at some point. Very quickly. And if we don't take a stand for freedom of speech, freedom in this country, then the threats that we're experiencing, that some are experiencing, this is a threat. This is a threat to us all. And that's something that I and you know, friends of mine, I think all service members understand truly in our heart of hearts. We take that oath to support and defend the Constitution so seriously that we are willing to give our lives to defend people's rights to free speech, whether we agree with that speech or not.
So I think this is a very reasonable take from her. What she's saying here is very reasonable. But I think, as you said in the introduction, it does kind of show that she's willing to change her beliefs to fit where she needs to be at any given point. Because she's absolutely right, and Joe's right here. A new administration can come in who've got absolutely no regard for free speech or freedom of press. And that's why it's so important those things are preserved. But the thing is, she's going to be part of that administration.
Yeah,
she's going to join that administration. She's going to cheer it on. So as much as she's sounding like she's very liberal and defending civil rights in this conversation, she will join the team that will start to impinge on civil rights, that will actually directly attack the freedom of the press. She's talking about how you've got to take the oath to defend the Constitution and be willing to give your life to defend people's right to free speech. She wasn't even willing to give up her job as Director of National Intelligence in order to protect people's free speech. So that is where she's changed to. Because the administration right now, the one that she's part of, 4 years, 5 years after this conversation's taking place, they're weaponizing the FCC. Yeah. They're aggressively going after media organizations and media figures they don't like. The president is suing media companies when he doesn't like their coverage, even media companies over here in the UK. He tried to sue the BBC for hundreds of millions of dollars over a way that ironically enough, a speech he gave at Jan 6th that neither of these two people will recognize happened or will acknowledge happened in this conversation. Yeah. He disagreed with how that was edited. So this administration that she's joined is not living up to the ideals she says in this conversation she'd be willing to die to defend.
This is, like we mentioned, a few days after January 6th, and people at that point were getting their accounts shut down for inciting violence and insurrection, right? This is what a lot of people were losing their accounts for. That's not something that someone didn't like. And they're making that claim to make it seem like people were arguing about ice cream flavors instead of stoking a riot. No one's saying you can't have free speech. Free speech is the president is bad. That's free speech, right? What I can't do is say, hey, let's all meet here and overthrow the government later today. Yeah. That's something you shouldn't be able to do, or at least if I was running a social media company. It's not something I would want to have on my social media, or things that people would say that would then go on to create violence in the real world would be something I would look to try to stomp out, which is what they were doing here. This next clip, they start to talk a little bit about how foreign agents might have stoked things on January 6th.
And what I was getting into with this Parler thing is we don't know where those threats emanated from. And they easily could be from foreign agents. Those things that people write, when you have an account and anyone can sign up for it, I guarantee you some of the shit stirring that led to the attack on the Capitol was coordinated by people that wanted to see chaos. Maybe, I mean, I'm sure a lot of it was people that really did believe that they were patriots. And there's a lot of simple-minded people. Like one of the things you're seeing about the people that were arrested, like the QAnon shaman who lives with his mom, who's posting FBI pedophile theories on the internet. I mean, these people are out there, right? And they're easily duped and they're easily led and they don't have a lot going on. And if somebody riles them up and then they have 30,000 or 300,000 of their fellow morons and they're all together, crazy shit can happen. So it's like, I don't know what the answer is.
I just want to ask Joe, and I want to do it really forcefully. Who do you think riled those people up? It's not some amorphous riling that's going on.
Yeah, exactly. It's very kind of someone comes and riles them up. I mean, this is actually one of the conclusions from the FBI investigation into January 6th. Here's a quote. In the weeks following the 2020 election, Trump's own senior officials repeatedly told him that his claims of widespread election fraud were false. He continued to spread the lies anyway. He convinced sponsoring groups like Concerned Women for America First to change the date of their planned protests from January 20th, Inauguration Day, which Trump saw as too late to change the course of events, to January 6th, when he thought the transfer of power to Biden could be blocked and his presidency continued. He told his followers on Twitter, come to Washington on January 6th, be there, it'll be wild, he promised. So, like, it's pretty clear who's riling up, including encouraging protest groups to change the date to be there on Jan 6th when the insurrection happened. There was some clear riling going on here, and he's not going to name who's behind that riling.
Yeah, and the solution that people came up with who were working with these social media accounts, they thought, what can we do? And they thought, well, maybe in order to prevent any future violence, why don't we just separate the people who were riled from the people who were riling them up? And they did that by deleting some accounts, by taking some of those accounts offline. That's how they decided to do it. There may be a better way to do that, but that's what they made their decision to do. And they're a private company, they're allowed to do that. We'll get into that, I'm sure, as we work our way through. And even if the way Joe sort of presents it, like I said, there's this force that is riling people up. He doesn't want to name the force. But even if some outside force was doing some sort of shit stirring, you still have to move from that particular bit all the way to climbing through a window at the Capitol that was just smashed broken by your placard, right? By the staff you brought with you, you smashed your way into the Capitol. There's a gap there between the riling and the action. The people who did this action, they have to take some responsibility for this. And it seems like Joe is hand waving that away, which is very different from how I've heard him talk about the George Floyd protests. I never heard him talk about foreign actors in the George Floyd protests. I've never heard him talk about people who rile other people up. In that case, it was the police who were riling people up. So I've never heard him say those types of things, but he seems very, very eager to carry this water for this segment of society.
Yeah, I think he does. And the fact that even at the start of this clip, you know, they're talking about Parler and how, which I don't know if it's particularly used now, but it was an online social media account often frequented by right-wing and far-right figures. He's talking about how that, we don't know how much of it was riled up there. We don't know how much of that, the people on Parler and places like that where you have an account and anyone can sign up, how many of those are foreign agents. And again, the interesting or the important thing is, this is taking place, as you mentioned in the intro, a week after Trump has been impeached for having riled up this insurrection. Weeks after Jan 6th, he's already, Joe here, starting to at least buy or at least float the story that there was foreign interference that was at least partly responsible for provoking it. But in doing so, he's completely ignoring all the people who we know were there and who were responsible on the ground, who were actually there. You know, I mentioned Trump. He gave a speech. He told people, we fight like hell. If you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. He specifically used the word fight 20 times in that speech, hours before, or, you know, not long before the actual start of the attack on the Capitol. In that speech, he singled out Mike Pence as the target, saying he needs to be courageous enough to do what he needs to be doing on that day. Trump wasn't saying that from Parler or from Russia. He was saying it from Washington, less than a mile or so, or, you know, very close to where the actual attack on the Capitol would start. That speech, by the way, that one that Trump gave there, that is now in 2026. That is a speech that Joe will see no issue with at all, basically, because the BBC recently aired a version of it where they shortened some of the things that Trump was saying. They shortened that clip down to just the key things, and in doing so, they cut out some of the middle bits, largely for time to fit into a news bulletin. And Trump is now trying to sue the BBC over that. And now Joe, in 2026, is accepting that as evidence that the media is distorting Trump's role in that Capitol attack. If anyone is unclear exactly what it was that Trump said in full and how no amount of editing is going to make this look better or worse than it was, we'll actually link to the whole transcript in the show notes. It was put up on NPR in 2021. So in February, the month after Jan 6th happened, we've got the entire transcript there. And actually, here's also, not just Trump, here's what the FBI would go on to conclude as who else was responsible for provoking the Jan 6th Capitol riot. Leaders of the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, who were ultimately convicted for seditious conspiracy, began planning for Jan 6th many weeks in advance. They set up encrypted communication channels with names like DC, OP, Jan 6, 2021, and Boots on the Ground to coordinate their activities. The January 6th Select Committee revealed evidence of an encrypted chat with MAGA luminary Roger Stone called FOS, Friends of Stone, that included leaders of both the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, as well as the organizer of Trump's January the 6th rally. The Oath Keepers also staged a quick reaction force in Arlington, Virginia, stockpiling firearms, ammunition, and tactical equipment. One member testified that the weapons cache was so large, it resembled what he'd seen in the military. Now, Joe wouldn't have known all of that at the time. This is 2 weeks after the Capitol attack happened. But I pointed out because it shows where his sympathies were already being pulled when he's starting to name the forces and alluding to the fact that this is foreign actors and foreign agents. It shows which version of events his feed was already leading him towards believing. And we actually showed in last week's episode of Andy Know that Joe was already predisposed to ignore the violence committed by the Proud Boys and give them a pass. And here's what that 2019 predisposition does to Joe 2 years later when the Proud Boys are involved in an insurrection.
I think it's so important to point out the way Joe thinks about the media here. When you said that the way he's looking at it, he's saying that the BBC did something wrong. The BBC was the one who did the wrong thing. And I think there is a predisposition of Joe to, if there is any story whatsoever that it shows that the media might have done anything that is editing or changing things or deliberately misrepresenting something, Joe will latch on to that as quickly as he can and hold on to it. And this is another example. And the worst part about that is that the things related to it suddenly are true. So the things that are related to it, no matter what, become a truth that he now holds, because he has to hold on to the fact that they did distort it. Because if they didn't distort it, then it falls apart. Then his idea about the media falls apart. So it's so important for him to keep these ideas about the media in his sights, and by relation, the things that they are saying, that the people who are attacking the media are saying, those things have to be true.
Yeah.
Now they're talking about how you get they're shutting down certain platforms because of this.
Because on one hand, if there's an organizing place where these people are getting together and they're really planning to do something as horrific as what happened, well, you should probably stop that. But the problem is, if you do shut that whole platform down because of these bad agents, you make it so that any platform can be shut down by any bad agents that come in and start doing something along those lines. So if a new competitor to Facebook or a new competitor to Twitter comes along, The easy way to shut them down, you infiltrate them with scumbags, or real or created. You have these people that jump on board, whether it's Gab or Minds or any of these other alternative social media networks, and you can just flood the gates with hate. And then everyone's going to be calling for them to be censored and shut down. And what you're essentially doing, you're reinforcing the monopoly that currently exists.
And again, just to reiterate, the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers literally set up encrypted communication channels to coordinate these activities. There's no question as to whether they were doing that or not. But here is Joe now, and he's constantly trying to invent hypothetical threats to hide real ones. And we've seen him do this before. Now, he's saying about, in this case, if you want to discredit Gab and Parler, you just flood it with fake Nazi accounts and then they'll start coming for Gab and Parler. But you don't need to flood Gab or Parler with fake Nazi accounts, because if you did that, really all you're going to do is confuse the real Nazis who are there, who don't know how to find their buddies anymore because there's too many people who seem to sound like them. But we've seen Joe quite often. We saw him do it even this year during the riots and the ICE presence in Minnesota, inventing a fake threat in order to excuse a real one.
Yeah.
You know what? Well, now someone just needs to dress up as an ICE agent, and that's gonna people aren't gonna trust them anymore. Now they can commit violence on the street. That's the real crime here. Is that that's the real tragedy. Is that you can't trust an ICE agent because someone could pretend to be an ICE agent. It's actually something he does with trans people in the opposite direction. We can't allow trans people anywhere because what if someone was pretending to be them? So he's very keen on creating these hypotheticals rather than engaging with the substance of the actual thing that's really happening, because he needs to defend his feeling about it at all costs. And if reality doesn't afford him the factual basis on which he can defend that feeling, he will create a fictional version of reality and a fictional example that will give him the space to carry on believing what he believes.
He really has a complicated disguise phobia, I think, is what he has. And so, like, if you wear, like, one of those noses with the eyes and the mustache, he would freak out around you. I want to say that, he mentions sort of this all or nothing here. He says, they want to shut it down. That's, again, hyperbolic. I don't think anybody at that point was like, hey, shut Twitter down because it helped with this. I mean, maybe there was some people, obviously, some people hate Twitter, and I wouldn't be sad if it went away. But I think, like, to frame it like everybody wants this to be shut down, not we're going to shut down some of these accounts because they were inciting an insurrection. That's not the same thing, but he seems to make it feel like it's the same thing. And again, when he uses that hyperbolic speech, he makes it seem like the other position is absurd.
Yeah, he does. But I mean, that's for Twitter. When it comes to Gab and Parler, it should be a case of if you're not willing to put the content moderation policies in place to stop Nazis, coordinating their activities in insurrection, then you should be shut down. You can't just you can't say we're so fond of free speech, such defenders of free speech, that you could literally plan an insurrection with your white supremacist mates and we'll back you. Well, if that's your policy, you don't get to carry on like that as a company because you're breaking other laws in doing so.
Absolutely. And I think, the problem is that they don't want anything. They don't want anything to happen. They want to keep the real key is that the squeakiest wheels want to keep doing this stuff. And they will convince everybody else that it's an infringement on their rights, even though no one would be affected except for a couple of small groups, because those small groups are doing things that can cause immense damage to not just democracy, but to human beings, to the cities, to the country itself.
Yeah, it's great. It's almost like their argument is, hey, if we stop those people planning a race riot, you won't be able to plan your race riot. It's like, right. But I mean, the rest of us don't want to do a race riot, so I think we're cool with that.
Do that at all. Yeah. Okay, so now they talk about Trump's media appeal.
One of the things that Taibbi outlines so well in his book is what went wrong with the Trump thing. Is that initially Trump was this buffoon who was running for president, who was saying a bunch of crazy shit, and everybody thought he was not going to win. And so they would highlight how ridiculous he was, thinking that what that would do was going to make people dismiss him as a real candidate. And even, respectable newspapers and respectable television shows like CNN and New York Times are saying Hillary Clinton's like 96% likely to win. So they had put all of this emphasis on what an idiot Trump was. They had highlighted all the outrageous things he was saying. They showed the videos from all of his rallies. And what they had done was they had inadvertently given him massive amounts of publicity, and they painted him as a buffoon. Then he wins. And then once he wins, they shifted gears. They go, okay, we have to change and now just attack him at every turn. And during that time, this is one of the things of the book where they're describing the record profits they were making, because it's extremely profitable to put something on television that everybody's watching. Right? If Trump is saying Mexicans are all rapists, everybody's like, holy shit, he said what? And the ratings would go up. So every time he would say something ridiculous like that, they would make money. And then the money went from that to the money got made in highlighting everything that's wrong with him. Yeah. And then the money came from turning him into this, it wasn't that hard, but turning him to this mega villain, right? And then the money on Fox was highlighting the how bad the liberals were, highlighting how ridiculous they were being about all the different, how Trump derangement syndrome is ruining our democracy. And to watch those two things play out against each other simultaneously, it's a wild thing to see.
This is actually leaning into what we're going to cover in the Toolbox, which is like a both sides were bad about this. But this is a really stupid media take. If you ask me for my opinion on this, I think this is a really ill-informed take on how the media was operating. I can completely agree. When it wasn't clear that Trump would win, it did play into his hands to emphasize how ridiculous and egregious he was and cover every single outrageous thing that he did. When it wasn't clear he was going to win, it actually, all that coverage did give him so much extra juice. He soaked up all the oxygen in the room and became the main character of the election because of how outrageous he was. So yeah, fine. That side of things, in retrospect, was a poor media strategy for covering what was a dangerous buffoon who was running for office. But once he won and is still a buffoon, and a dangerous buffoon at that, what does Joe think the media should have done? Just stop paying attention to what the president was doing because you might give him more attention in doing so? Obviously not. Like, you're going to cover the dangerous buffoon who just got in.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And in a way, we're sort of making the media be like an anthropomorphic thing. We're saying that the media itself has its own brain and it acts in a certain way. It's trying to decide whether or not Trump should be elected. I don't think that the media really cared whether Trump was going to be elected. I think, like you suggest, they were going out of their way to get clicks because they said, this is absurd, let's highlight it. But I don't think that there's any reason why to think that they cared one way or the other, or, you know, I mean, in any way. I mean, they probably wanted him to get elected because it felt like that was probably a lot of money for them. But in any case, I don't think that there's any real push from the media itself. The way Joe describes it, it feels like he's trying to make it seem like the media had this idea about what they wanted to do, and they had an idea how they wanted to push him. And then he also says that they were highlighting these stupid things that Trump said, and then once he's in power, they're saying he's dangerous. Well, the reason why they're saying he's dangerous is because now he has the power to do stupid things, right? Yeah, so before, it's just stupid when you say, I want to ban cars or something. You know, if you say some dumb thing, and you're a nobody, it doesn't matter. But if you say a dumb thing and you're powerful and you can do something about it, then suddenly it becomes dangerous. And I think Joe and Taibbi totally missed that point here.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I actually think the media did have an interest here. I think the media didn't want Trump to win, but they were just completely ineffectual in their way of going about illustrating why he shouldn't win, because they focused on how ridiculous he was. And thinking, if we just keep highlighting how outrageously ridiculous and stupid this guy is, he's not going to win. And that's something that was a totally tactical misstep from the media. They felt that holding up an unbiased mirror to what he's actually saying would be enough, and clearly it wasn't.
It was not enough.
It was not. And it's a bit like, it reminds me, there's Romana Dadula, who's in Canada, claims herself to be the Queen of Canada, and she gets media coverage for how ridiculous it is that she's decided she's the Queen of Canada and has this kind of like parade of caravans that go around with her and RVs that travel around with her, and she's taking lots of money from all of her followers, and it's often covered by the media like it's ridiculous. But if she suddenly did become the Queen of Canada, it would stop being ridiculous and would start being dangerous because of all the dangerous things she's talking about doing. And as you say, she's now got the ability to do it. And he talks as well here. He brings up the idea of Trump derangement syndrome that Fox News would talk about a lot. I think the fact that Trump fans managed to smuggle Trump derangement syndrome into the lexicon was such a win for them because it allowed so many people to write off any genuine concerns about Trump as just orange man bad.
Yep.
But the thing is, like that was 2021 that Joe's talking about this. Look at America right now. The warnings about Trump being an existential threat to democracy weren't ridiculous.
Nope.
They were accurate. Like, can you even imagine what Fox News would have said during his first term if a liberal had come out and said, Donald Trump is going to demolish a wing of the White House? That would have been evidence of Trump derangement syndrome. Look at how crazy these liberals are. They think he's going to take a wrecking ball to the White House.
Absolutely.
He's done that. He's been allowed to do it. The trick is to make every warning sound ridiculous until it actually comes to pass, at which point the thing you were warned about is either not a big deal actually, or it's fine because you were warned about it and you voted for it anyway, so it must have been what you voted for. We went through this with the Brexit vote extensively in the UK. People saying, well, people knew what would happen because they were warned about it. So yes, they were warned about it by us and you told them we were lying. So that isn't a real warning now.
Okay, this next clip, they talk about a stolen election.
My concern is that one of the things that Trump did that was really disturbing was this narrative that the elections were stolen and that he won by a landslide, and even using certain things as an example that were easily disproven. Like one of the things that he used as an example, Kyle Kulinski actually discussed it on the show. We did an election day show, and Kyle Kulinski was explaining Pennsylvania. And he said the way Pennsylvania works is the first votes they count are the walk-up votes, the people that actually go to the polls. Those votes are going to they're going to lean heavy in Trump's favor because he's put out this narrative, go vote in person, whereas the Democrats have put out this narrative to mail in your vote. So the first votes that get counted are going to be the votes of the people that walk up. It's going to skew heavily towards Trump. But then once they count those and they start counting the mail-in votes, it's going to lean much heavier towards Biden. And people are going to call shenanigans, but this is why it's happening. So Kyle Kulinski lays this all out on the show day of the election.
Right.
It plays out exactly like he said. Trump was way ahead. Then they start counting in the mail-in votes. The mail-in votes lean very heavily towards Biden. Biden ultimately winds up winning. But the way Trump describes it is if it's this grand scheme. We go to bed and all of a sudden, we go to bed way ahead. And then all of a sudden they magically find all these votes. And then it leans towards Biden. Like, no. This is how it was going to go. If you are a political pundit and you understand the system and how it works, this was how it's going to go. So all the people that are the same people like, oh, I heard she's a Russian asset, the people that give a cursory examination of all these different things that don't have the time to go on these deep dives, they're all going to hear that story and go, did you hear what they did in Pennsylvania? Those sons of bitches in the middle of the night, they came in with trucks of fucking ballots and all went to Biden mysteriously.
Okay, what Joe's describing here is called the Red Mirage. This was a phenomenon that happened in the 2020 election. There was an immense voter turnout in the 2020 election because most people didn't have a lot going on. It was COVID. So, and one of the reasons why a lot of people were suggesting you mail in your vote was because of COVID. Those were reasons why people decided not to go to the polls that year. So there was a red mirage, and it played out exactly how Kyle Kulinski explained it to him, that the mail-in voting wound up overtaking the in-person voting, and they counted the in-person voting first. The things that Trump said were a 100% lie, and we know this is true. We know this is true because no one has ever, even in the recounts that they did, in the analysis that they did after the fact, the postmortem stuff that they did, all the court cases, nothing has ever shown the things that Trump said to be true. Nothing has ever. There is some small amount of voter fraud that happens in every single election. And what happened was, and these are tiny amounts, by the way. This is not
rounding
like
error.
Thousands of votes. This is like onesie, twosie votes in different places across the country. There was a tiny amount of voter fraud, just like there is every time, but he blew it up as much as he could and lied as much as he could because it was a result he didn't want to face. It was something he didn't want to see. He wanted something else to be true, and so he just made it up. And a lot of people followed him. A bunch of pundits followed him. A bunch of pundits said that there was massive voter fraud. In fact, there's video of one of these pundits literally saying, I don't care if something is true or not. I will literally lie about it if it means Trump gets to be in office. I will lie. I will 100%. I don't care what's true and what's not true.
Yeah.
So there was people out there pushing a narrative that Trump created because of his wounded ego. And this is not a group of people who value the truth. They value power. And I think one of the things that we did completely wrong when Trump was making this lie up is we did not prosecute him and hold him accountable for this dangerous, dangerous lie that he has spread.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a thing that Joe will never understand, and never understand about Trump especially. But I think it's a weak spot that Joe often has in his ability to pass what he's being told. Like, Trump isn't telling you necessarily what he thinks he's true. He's telling you the lie that's convenient for him in the moment, or sometimes what he wants you to think is true. It's why when Trump was on Joe's show, he's saying about like all the things he's seen about UFOs, and Joe comes away going, well, what could he be alluding to about that? And he's just lying to you because it's what's useful to him right then. He hasn't seen anything. It's why even now when Donald Trump talks about the first impeachment, he always describes it as being impeached for a perfect phone call, even though we know for a fact it was not a perfect phone call. They just lacked the numbers to push the impeachment through. But now that narrative is stuck for a lot of people in his support base. And even Joe will now say, well, you know, they came after Trump with two different impeachments. This is unfair. This is political. This is an attack. It's just how it works now. He won't acknowledge that there was factual and basis and grounds for both impeachments. He's forgotten all that because Trump keeps lying about what either of them were. And he's allowed Joe to memory hold the whole thing.
Yeah. This next clip is about what happened in Georgia. And Georgia was a hotbed for some controversy during the time because Trump had lost it narrowly. And so they were doing all they could to try to change those votes. And so this is them talking about it.
Or the thing that happened in Georgia when they were saying, oh, they were hiding ballots underneath the table. And then when the people that were observing left, then they pulled the ballots out. But no, you hear from the actual Georgia official, and he goes, that's not what happened at all. Here, you can see them here's the video of them bringing in those ballots. They store them under the table because you got a limited amount of room to move. They stored it under the table in clear view of these observers. They were told that they were going to go home, and then they got a phone call saying, no, you need to keep counting. So after these people left, that's when they get the call and they say, okay, let's keep counting. So they pull those ballots out. But it gets talked about by Rudy Giuliani and all these other people like, oh, this is this nefarious plot. They hid these ballots underneath the table. And if you're just looking at the video footage from a surveillance camera and you don't know exactly what happened, that scenario makes sense to you. So there's so many people that have this distorted perception of what went down, and they really believe that this was all stolen. Now, here's another problem. The amount of voter fraud is not zero. It's never zero.
That's true.
It's not zero. So if you ask somebody, is there any voter fraud? They have to say yes, because there's some voter fraud. There's probably voter fraud left, and there's probably voter fraud right. And Nancy Pelosi was saying that the election was rigged in 2016. She was saying that it was a scam. She put it on her Twitter. This is the same exact thing that Republicans are doing today, and they're calling for them to resign from Congress.
It is a false equivalency. Pretty bad one, too. Pelosi posted, our election was hijacked. There is no question. Congress has a duty to protect our democracy and follow the facts. Now, she did this on May 16th of 2017, and she did this in response to Congress currently investigating at that time Trump's discussion with James Comey, who was the head of the FBI, to drop charges against Michael Flynn, who was found guilty of lying to the FBI about Russia's involvement with the Trump campaign. At this point, there was no Mueller investigation that had been created yet, and they very specifically were investigating President Trump. So she posted that in response to what was happening there. These two things aren't the same. Trump literally made up all the election interference lies. Pelosi and Congress were in the middle of an investigation when they said that. First off, she doesn't say the things he said she says, right? He says that she said that the election was rigged. She doesn't say that. She said the election was hijacked. She's saying it was a scam. Again, those are different words, right? That's a different way to present it. And those two things are not the same. They're not, there's one that has an investigation that's happening and one that has, is just what Trump wants to be true, so he's lying about it to everybody else. And every single investigation after the fact has shown that there wasn't a single shred of truth to what Trump was saying.
Yeah, absolutely true. And I think the thing is, Joe's making a point in the middle here, and it's not quite clear exactly what point he's making, saying that there's never zero voter fraud. So if you ask somebody, is there any voter fraud, they have to say yes. I think that's true, although if you were in any position of responsibility and someone asked you, is there any voter fraud, you shouldn't just say yes. You should say yes, but the amount is so small, it is a drop in the ocean and does not change elections. It's less than 1,000%. It's inconsequential. And often we're talking about in elections with millions of votes being cast, hundreds at most of those votes being fraudulent in some way. And sometimes that fraud is somebody casting a vote when they aren't eligible to vote because they lost their voting rights due to a criminal record or something. Sometimes it's people voting in one state when they're actually registered to vote in a different state. Sometimes it can just be mistakes and things. It doesn't necessarily... What's important is when people talk about voter fraud in any kind of meaningful way, they're talking about a coordinated effort to fraudulently change the outcome of an election due to an influx of fraudulent votes. And in that definition, no, there isn't really voter fraud. That doesn't happen.
This next clip, this is when Tulsi is talking about election fraud and they're trying to decide whether it is actually happening.
There's a major issue that I brought up over a year before the 2020 election, about how there are certain states that don't have any paper backups to their electronic systems. So in theory, if any of these systems were hacked in any kind of way where you could manipulate the outcome of, manipulate people's votes to swing the election one way or the other, there would not be an auditable paper trail that, election officials could use to point to, okay, well, this is actually how many people voted for this candidate, that candidate, but this is where the electronic system was manipulated and got it wrong. So the bill that I introduced was called the Securing America's Elections Act. It was a bipartisan bill that very, very simply still allowed supported states in their responsibility that they have to run elections that's constitutionally provided. But it said if you have an electronic system, you have to provide a voter verified paper backup, meaning like in Hawaii, you have I've gone and I used the machine there before and you punch it in. And before you submit your ballot, it's got a printout that says, OK, these are all your candidates. If it's correct, you submit, and they keep that paper backup on hand, or you just use a paper ballot. Either way, you have an auditable paper trail, and it would have provided federal funding for states to be able to implement this and put it in action. Made the case to Republican and Democratic leaders. Pass this bill. 2020 is a big election coming up. We want to make sure that we reduce the amount of vulnerabilities that exist and maintain the integrity of our election so that people aren't raising these concerns, or even there should be any question in people's minds that these electronic systems have any vulnerability at all. Congress chose not to pass the bill.
Was there arguments against it?
Not that I heard.
So what was the reason why they passed, why they went against it?
I mean, it just wasn't done. There were no legitimate arguments against it.
So the Senate and the House were held by different parties at the time, and the reason it wouldn't pass it or introduce it was because it had no chance of actually passing, right? Mm-hmm. That just wouldn't have been something that I think two different parties would have agreed on. She seems to make it seem like it's a bipartisan thing, but often those things don't make it out. And in this case, it doesn't even seem like it made it out of committee. I looked this bill up, and it seems like it was introduced and then introduced to committee, and then it stalled. Now, I 100% agree this is a terrible system that we have here in the United States. It's really bad that we don't We don't pass bills. We don't introduce bills. They don't talk about bills on the Senate floor often because of the filibuster. So we don't ever even see anything that isn't really budgetary. But the problem is that this is something that really benefits Republicans. When you conserve, when you stop, that's literally what Republicans are, conservatives. They want to stop things from moving forward. They don't want progress. So it's perfect. It's a perfectly sort of conservative system in the sense that nothing really ever gets introduced except for budgetary measures. And that's the only thing that we can ever really pass because those things require a lower chance for them to be introduced and a lower vote count to be introduced. And so nothing ever really happens. And that actually benefits the conservatives. So they don't want to change the rules on that. They don't want things to change because that would mean that there's a chance that progress happens. And they don't want to see that. So why didn't this happen? Tulsi should be looking at the people across the aisle as to why this didn't happen. Why didn't it get introduced into the floor? I couldn't tell you, but I can tell you that it never made it out of committee. That's what I can say. So this is the next clip. We're not skipping any tape. It's still them talking about this particular bill that she had introduced.
I heard some states saying like, oh, well, we don't know if we want to change it or whatever. But if the federal government had the ability to go in and that's what my bill did. It tied this change to federal funding to administer the elections, to provide that as an incentive. So the point is to have some foresight and have leaders with foresight in Congress to say, you know what, 2020 is going to be a big election. There'll be a lot of eyes on it. Critical outcome one way or the other. Let's take action now in order to prevent people questioning the integrity of our election and therefore our democracy. Many of those same people who are complaining or raising concerns about this today are people who chose not to take action that could have prevented us in large part from being in the situation that we are in. So holding these leaders accountable and calling them on their crap is essential if we want to actually start to see some change.
The thing about this is she's talking about this as the paper backup to elections in order to illustrate that there's absolutely no fraud at all. There's no, and that would be a way out of this mess. I don't think Trump or Giuliani or any of the people in his team or any of his supporters would have stopped crying foul if there had been proper paper backups to the elections. They wouldn't have said these elections were stolen. They wouldn't have stopped saying that if there were paper backups. They've been crying foul. They'd just be crying foul on those paper backups, you know, just like the lies that they spread about ballot stuffing in Georgia and in other kind of places. They would find a different thing because they're not talking about the reality of what they really believe happened in the election. They're trying to push the lie that gets them where they want to go. So her solution just wouldn't really, you know, it might make elections more stable in terms of you can prove something, but it wouldn't have been a solution to the problem they're talking about, which is that Trump was lying about having won that election.
Yeah, and Trump was revving that lie up for some time. There's an NPR article I'll link, but here's a couple of quotes that he had said before the election. So he said, quote, "We have to vote and we have to make sure that we stop them from cheating because they cheat like dogs." Trump said that on August 3rd in Atlanta. He also said, "Watch for voter fraud because we win without voter fraud. We win so easily." He said that on September 6th. He said, "Anytime you have a mail-in ballot, there's going to be massive fraud." He told that to Dr. Phil on August 27th. And then Trump vowed long-term prison sentences for election cheaters. And he said that at September 13th rally in Vegas. He also said, we have a good lead, but we have got to be careful because remember, they cheat like hell. So Trump was for a long time planting this lie that he was planning to use if he lost the election, because he did the same thing in 2024. He basically planted a lie that it was rigged. And even the night of, there was one or two things that he was saying, it's rigged here, but you didn't see a lot of that because he had won so quickly this last time that they never went with that. But if he'd have lost, I guarantee you he would have said the same thing he did in 2020, which was it was a lie because he had planted it ahead of time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he planned for a long time. His strategy into all the elections he's faced is, I'm going to win and win big. And if I don't, it was cheating. And that's his approach to elections at all points. And that gives him the perfect out in any direction.
So Joe brings up the documentary Hacking Democracy.
Did you ever see Hacking Democracy, the HBO documentary?
No.
It was about the dye bulb machines, the same issue that happened in the past. And it showed on the documentary that they could adjust the results. They could adjust the results because there was a built-in, into the dye bulb systems, there was a built-in access for a third party.
Wow.
Yeah, whatever. What's the big deal, Tulsi?
Just our democracy.
Let's talk about pronouns because that's what's important. Like people are the amount of distractions that people are subject to today too is also unprecedented because of social media. So concentrating on these key issues and really important things like murder hornets, it's hard. It's hard to do because there's so much shit going on. There's like your news feed is constantly inundated with things.
So again, like he's bringing up the dye bulb machines. He's bringing up this one documentary which did show some kind of evidence in one area, but that's not reflective of every single part of the voting, the voting mechanisms. But rather than talk about that or consider that or think about that, he switches to pronouns and how many distractions there are. But the thing is, the people trying to distract you with talk of pronouns, they're the ones trying to convince you the election was stolen. Like, neither of those are issues of real substance here. The election wasn't stolen, but it wasn't, Democrats weren't putting pronouns front and center to distract you from the possibility of the election being stolen. It was Republicans, it was Trump in particular, who was putting both those things front and center to distract you from the fact that they were stealing the democracy from you.
She's going to continue on in that vein to talk about pronouns and how it was the first priority of the House.
You look at the first thing that this new Congress did, the 117th Congress, right after being sworn in, first week of January, instead of, say, passing a bill that would mandate that limited resource of vaccines that we have go directly towards the most vulnerable seniors who are right now dying at the highest rates because of COVID, instead of doing something real and important that would actually save people's lives and reduce hospitalizations in this country, the thing that they passed was this administrative rules package that deleted all mention of mother, father, brother, sister, aunt, uncle, son, or daughter, and instead changed it to say in the House of Representatives, when you're referencing anyone who holds, I don't know what you call it, this title, this position, it's not mother or father, it's now parent. It is now parent-in-law, not mother-in-law or father-in-law. It is now child.
What do you do for aunt and uncle?
Or sibling. You say parent's brother, I think is what they said, or parent's sister.
Which parent?
Exactly.
Which one?
I don't know.
You can say parent's brother, so that's gendered though.
Right.
What if she chooses to now
parent
be
sibling.
a woman?
It would be parent sibling. That's what it would be.
But this is all very important.
But this is what I'm talking about though, and this is where people just like, give me a break.
Yeah.
Give me a break. This is the most important thing that you feel is the highest priority to take action on in this new year, in this new Congress?
Well, if you're on Twitter, that is the most important thing, or the least important thing, depending upon what Twitter feed you follow.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe it wasn't the most important thing, but it's a thing they felt mattered that they could achieve with the stroke of a pen and required zero additional resources or coordination to do that. It's just a thing on paper to take out the gendered language, which, Joe was going to make this all about kind of trans people, but as much as anything, it's about recognizing that women have an equal role in power and not having to gender it around any particular...
That flies over his head.
Yeah, exactly. Straight over his head. And maybe it also had symbolic value. As a break from an administration that very clearly used people's lives and their rights as culture war footballs to distract from their legislative failures. The rights of trans people, the rights of women were just culture war issues to the Trump administration, so you didn't pay attention to what he was actually doing. So maybe there is some symbolic value in coming in and with a stroke of a pen showing those days are done now, we're not like that.
Yeah. No, those are good points, Marsh. And I think, the way she's presenting it, it almost seems like she's saying there has to be this sort of big push, this giant thing, this production that has to happen in order for this to happen. Changing the House rules doesn't require a vote in the other house. It doesn't require it to go to the president to get a veto. It's changing the House rules. And so they can do that. And they did that. I know that there's a limited amount of time for things. I understand that. And I also appreciate that. But I also recognize that this is a quick change. This isn't months of them debating it. This is just a quick change that they put in the rules. And again, I think that they're going to try to highlight it to make it seem like they're wasting their time there when it was a small amount of thing that they did in order to try to create some equality that wasn't there in the previous administration. I don't think it's a loss, and I don't think it's a big giant chunk of time.
Yeah.
But it's something that she's bringing up here because I think Tulsi is trying a desperate rebrand after losing the Democratic nomination. This next one is talking about Trump and force.
That's like I said, what I'm really worried about with the way Trump is addressing his loss is that this January 6th thing that we saw is indicative of that. And then he denounced the people who did it. Like he's telling them that you have to be strong. You need to show a show of force. And these people the ultimate show of force. They literally knocked over security guards, beat a guy to death, stormed the Capitol. The whole thing is so fucking strange. And hearing that he wants to start another party, like, oh, Jesus Christ, and call it the Patriot Party. Remember the Patriot Act? Yeah. That's an unpatriotic. And not only that, like calling it the Patriot Party is such but it's almost like what I would expect out of this, whoever's writing this goofy fucking script for this wacky show we're on. Like, yeah, that's what it would be. The guy who left off, now he's going to start the Patriot Party, and all the true patriots are going to line up for him. Look, there's a lot of people out there that are dying for someone to tell them what to do, and that's scary. That's a real problem. It's a real problem.
It is a problem, but the problem is you're going to forget that completely. Joe is very clearly showing in this clip that he recognizes, he can see that the insurrection was stoked by Trump, that Trump had a very clear hand, maybe not the whole hand, maybe not explicit and direct, but very clearly had a hand in stoking up and fomenting the rage that was then turned on the Capitol and would have been turned on the people in the Capitol. January 6th should have been the end of Trump. It absolutely should have been. But people like Joe and Tulsi helped to memory hole Trump's entire role in the insurrection so they could then become the handmaidens of a second, even more extreme Trump term. While they will, as we'll see in the Toolbox, act like they are smarter than all this tribal politics and stuff. And Joe is saying there are people out there who are dying for someone to tell them what to do. And in 3 years' time, he's going to be the person telling people what to do and to vote for Trump. That is what he's going to do. So this is showing you how far he fell in those 3 years.
All right, so we're going to move on to our Toolbox section.
Wow. So that's the tool bag? And something just fell out of the tool bag?
So the Toolbox this time is both sides.
Yeah, so we see this quite a lot in this conversation. They want to criticize the Trump administration, but they don't just do that on the strengths of what Trump and the people around him have done. They have to do it in the sense of, well, Trump's doing this, but the Democrats are just as bad over here. And in some ways, they take a step back as if they are better than both sides. But in other ways, they're trying to say that the whole system's just as bad. Everything is bad as everything else here. There is nobody's more culpable for the position that America finds himself in January 2021, 2 weeks after an insurrection.
Yeah. It was a real change in American history in a lot of ways when you look back on this moment. And there was a lot of people who were really upset at this point. And I want you to pay attention to sort of think about where you were back when this sort of thing was happening, when you found out about the the insurrection that was taking place. A lot of us found out in real time while it was happening what was going on at the Capitol. Some of us watched TV. I remember I sat in front of my TV that day for about 12 hours.
Yeah.
I had turned it on when it started, and I watched all the way through until they removed everything from the Capitol, and I watched all the speeches they gave that evening, all the different people who gave speeches that evening, because Congress kept going to certify that vote. So I remember sitting there into the wee hours waiting for things to materialize and finish. And so I want you to bring yourself back to that moment, because that was just 2 weeks before they're having this conversation.
Yeah, I was exactly the same. I put on CNN the second that I heard it was happening. I could get CNN on my telly, and I watched it until like 2 or 3 in the morning UK time.
Yeah.
6 hours ahead of you, because it was very clear that this is a monumental moment in history when the American experiment turns in on itself in a very clear and violent way.
Yeah, and I also think we also need to think about this too as a framing. Tulsi at this point is a defeated Democrat nominee for president. She left Congress. I really do feel like if you listen to this, it sounds to me like Tulsi is trying to reinvent herself. She's trying to distance herself. We heard it in the first segment, how she's trying to distance herself from some more left ideas about social policy. And I think that there is a definite push that she's pushing herself away to try to reinvent herself. I think that's how I'm viewing it. You may have a different opinion, but I think that seems to me like what she's trying to do. She's trying to show herself to a group of people who I think she met on the campaign trail who might not have been as staunch Democrats, that she is someone who's different and she's sort of middle of the road. And it eventually secured her a position in Trump's cabinet.
Yeah,
so,
exactly. I mean, not only she's trying to reinvent herself so strongly that she's launching a podcast on this podcast. She's trying to appeal to podcasters here.
Yeah. So we're going to start out this Toolbox section talking about big tech money.
Yeah, and Google at this point and Facebook have so much money.
Yeah.
To be on their bad side, to have them support a candidate that's contrary to your position. Like if you're in a position of censorship and there's another candidate that's like, listen, we don't have to censor, help me out. Like, I'll let you guys do. I think you're good people. You're just trying to do your best work, and it's a crazy world. Like there's no need.
Yeah.
There's no need for Congress to legislate. The Senate doesn't have to come down on you. The president shouldn't have a say. You're a private company. And this is the argument. And I legitimately see both sides of it, because when this Parler ban thing came out, I was very concerned. But I was also concerned that Parler was allowing these people that were on there that were organizing violence. So if there's no moderation at all, and they're on and they're saying, hey, we're bringing pipe bombs. I don't know what they were saying, but if they were saying something along those lines, we're going to attack the Capitol. We're going to zip tie and kill every politician we have. Like, you should probably do something about that.
Yes.
So where's the line get drawn as to what you censor and what you don't, what you report and what you don't? Yeah. And the argument that Tim Cook laid out was that the things that were on Parler, the reason why they pulled it from the App Store, is that they need some moderation. That's what he was saying. And he was saying once they have that moderation, they'll be allowed back on the App Store, which seems fairly reasonable. The problem is it's kind of a slippery slope. Like, okay, you take that out, threats of violence, plans of attacks on federal buildings, but then where does that line get drawn? Like when do you allow free speech to just reign?
So, yeah, Joe, he can see both sides on this here, except, of course, when he's talking to literally anybody in government or anyone in big tech or anyone these days who tells him that Jan 6 was a coup and that Trump had some role to play in that coup.
Yeah. When I hear Joe talk about this, I don't know if you get the same impression, Marsh, but when I hear him talk about this, it almost seems like he's trying as hard as he can to not give anyone a solid opinion. He's trying as hard as he can to stay middle of the road so he can keep both avenues open. When I hear that, what pops in my mind is that he's reading comments from both sides that are attacking him when he makes a decision or makes an opinion about this stuff. And so he's trying to sort of walk a tightrope between two extremes that allow him to have both opinions in some way simultaneously and also reject both opinions simultaneously, so he doesn't receive any of that criticism. That's what it sounds like to me, especially as a content creator. That's what it sounds like to me. I'm not sure if other people might agree or not. The argument that here is that on the one hand, we have a social media network that's connecting and revving up groups of sort of right-wing extremists to commit violence. And on the other, you have someone who's not willing to allow an app on their store because it connects extremists. And he's making them sound like they're equal. They're not equal. Those are not equal things. I want people to think about this in a different way. Imagine if you had a bar and you found out that 2 of your customers are trading child sexual abuse material or plans of an assassination. Let's say that they have one of those things that they're doing, and you didn't know about it, and they found out, and it happened at your bar, and they got prosecuted or whatever. You wouldn't be at fault for that. That's not something that someone would say, hey, you're at fault for this because you were a place where they discuss this. It's not your fault. But if week after week after week, they keep coming back, and then you give them the back room and you allow them to put on your sign outside that this is where you meet up for the assassination discussion, and they allow them to send invites out, and then you basically allow them to be in your place to talk about this stuff when you know about it. Now that's something we can say, hey man, you knew that they were there meeting up with people. You were helping facilitate this. That's the difference between these two things. He makes it seem like there's no way they can know. There's no way they can know all this stuff. There's plenty of ways that they can know. Try to post a nipple on Facebook and see how far you get. There's plenty of ways that they know about what's going on their network. It's just not in their business interest to stop it. That's the real key, and that's something he will never ever come. He'll never come to that conclusion.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think, to be honest, these days, Apple would probably let Parler back on the App Store and let you sell those plans to kidnap someone, as long as Apple got their 30% taste of those kidnapping plans.
That is 100% true. Oh, man. All right. Next bit. This is talking about the election again. So since we did this, obviously this isn't in order. This is them talking about the election. It's just a piece of that we pulled out that clearly illustrates the both sides.
I'm concerned. And like I said, I'm concerned about the way Trump rejected the election results, that they're similar to the way a lot of the Democrats rejected the 2016 results, and that I understand that they want their side to win, but I don't think they understand the ultimately corrosive impact this is going to have on the confidence that people have in democracy. Yeah. In election results, people right now, Republicans are some ungodly number. It's like in the high 70%. This is what the most recent. Let's see if we can find this. The Republicans that believe the election results were illegitimate. I think it was in the 70s, which is just bananas. Even if you asked Democrats after 2016, I don't think it would be that high. Maybe if you said how many people believe Russia had a part in Donald Trump being elected, maybe that would be a little higher. But at least they probably thought that the people that voted, like that it was probably ultimately representative of how the people voted. They thought those people had been misled. They probably thought propaganda was involved, and there was a bunch of, really incorrect stuff that was said that led people to vote the wrong way. But I think they probably more or less believe that Donald Trump won. It's probably very disheartening.
I don't know. I mean, if you talk to Hillary Clinton, she won.
I don't talk to that lady.
Well, anybody who does.
Yeah. Well, she did win the public. I mean, she won the popular vote. She really did. I mean, that's a fact, right? So that kind of goes against the Russian narrative right there. It's like, what a slippery game you're playing. Yeah. You're going to let more people vote for Hillary, but just the right amount in the swing states so that you get the Electoral College vote?
Yeah. Okay, so this isn't great political analysis. His argument that he's making here is self-refuting. He literally...
We need that shirt. This isn't great political analysis.
And just a picture of Joe Rogan. Yeah, exactly. But his argument is self-refuting. He said it's dangerous that both sides equally reject the results of elections they dislike. And then he admits that the Democrats did actually accept the result. It's just they argued that the result was provoked by lies and distortions, which isn't that they're both as bad as each other, because meanwhile, the Republicans were arguing that the voting machines had been hacked by Venezuela or Cuba or China or, Hugo Chavez. And they had vote ninjas come along and confiscate the machines and sniff the ballots to see if they smelled of bamboo and not look for made-up signs of interference. These aren't the same. He's presenting them as if they're the same. He said 2020 Republicans did this, 2016 the Democrats were doing a similar kind of thing. It's just not the case at all. And then as for the Democrat concerns in 2016, there was proof that Russia did actively try to interfere with the 2016 election, that they actively tried to help Donald Trump, and that the Trump campaign actively welcomed it. There just wasn't any proof that they actively colluded in that they actually did something with that they're actually working directly with Russia deliberately, and that's why they weren't held accountable for it. That's entirely different to saying, I think China hacked the votes and stuffed ballots in the middle of the night in Georgia. And then Joe's point about the popular vote. Well, the popular vote, the fact that Hillary Clinton won it, should be proof that Russia isn't. It goes against the Russian narrative. The point is that Russia didn't need to stop millions of people from voting how they wanted to vote, or, change the voting habits of millions of people, of the majority of the country. That's not what they were looking to do. What they wanted to do was target key moments, key demographics in swing states and get them to either change their vote based on very targeted kind of messaging, or not go out and vote at all and actually stay home. Russia, for example, hacked and released the Democrats' emails, which Donald Trump stood on a stage during one of the debates and said, Russia, if you're listening, hack those emails. And then Russia hacked and released those emails, but there wasn't any collusion because Donald Trump didn't know for certain Russia were listening to the US presidential debate at the time. But the release of those emails prompted Comey to confirm they were reopening a criminal case into the Clinton campaign literally days before, 11 days before the election, only to then close it before the election after the damage was already done to the narrative that Hillary Clinton was being investigated for crime. Here's a quote from around the time on October 28th, 2016, 11 days before the election. Comey notified Congress that the FBI had started looking into newly discovered emails. On November 6th, Comey notified Congress that the FBI had not changed its conclusion. But people didn't take away from that the message that Hillary Clinton has been investigated and been found innocent of all charges again. They took away from the fact that she'd been investigated. So, there was Russian interference. This isn't the same as what the Republicans were saying in 2020. And Joe's presenting it like both sides are doing exactly the same thing here, before then going on to say that they're not.
Yeah. The worst part about being a vote ninja is when you're moving those big voting machines and one falls on your foot because you only have two toes and it's a bigger target. Smash into it. Really hurts.
The thing is, what a lot of people get wrong about the vote ninjas, they weren't wearing black to blend in in a kind of stealth way. That was just because when they're moving the voting machines around on stage, you're meant to think that the voting machines are moving by themselves. It's a purely kabuki theater.
It's a whole thing. All right. This next bit, this is still talking about election integrity, and then they bring up censorship.
The danger of overall eroding people's confidence in our elections and the integrity of our elections. And also, and I think the whole kind of cancel culture goes along with this, and the censorship and the suppression of people's free speech is because if they feel that they don't have a voice to speak on whatever they want to speak on, and if they don't have a voice through their votes, then what's left?
Right.
This is where, and I think we've seen this over, what happened on January 6th, but also over this past year, where people feel that the only way that they can bring about change is through violence.
Yeah.
And this is the dangerous consequence of where this partisan divisiveness takes us.
Yeah.
And it also points to the dangerous normalization of this kind of politically driven violence, where one side kind of says, well, it's okay if I agree with your motivation for going and burning down buildings and rioting and looting and whatnot. but it's not okay if I disagree with the motivation of these other people. And that normalization of taking kind of the conflict culture that exists online and is now being embodied and manifested in reality in different ways, again, as a symptom and a byproduct of this hyperpartisanship and this divisiveness. This is the dangerous reality that is coming about because of people who are more interested in their power than they are interested in the well-being of our country, our freedom, and the American people.
So this is classic both sides of the issue, both sides as bad as each other. Her argument is that eroding democracy, that's bad, but so is cancel culture. So January 6th is a both sides issue because of cancel culture. The people who tried to overthrow the government did so because their free speech had been suppressed and the left had tried to cancel them, so they had no choice but to riot on the Capitol.
Yeah.
And then she goes on talking of riots to, I think she's comparing like the BLM protests and the response to George Floyd's murder to the overthrowing of the Capitol, saying you can't support one attack on a building but not support a different attack on a building if they're both politically motivated just because you happen to agree with one cause or not. But the BLM protests and the insurrection weren't the same thing, even if you were condemning rioting and criminal damage. Because smashing up a shop front in the middle of your town is not the same thing as a coordinated attack to break into the Capitol building in order to try and execute politicians and stop the certification of an election in order to overthrow democracy. It's very different to throw a brick through the window of your local Best Buy than it is to put a brick through the window of the Capitol because you're trying to get to Nancy Pelosi to kill her.
This next clip's pretty short. It's talking about tribal leadership.
So much of this just comes down to leadership or the lack thereof, and people who are more interested in serving their own selfish interests rather than fulfilling this huge obligation and responsibility to serve the interests of the people first.
Not just selfish interests, but also tribal interests.
Yes.
The interests of the Democratic tribe or the Republican tribe.
Yes.
It's funny how often in this conversation she brings up the idea of a lack of leadership on both sides while she is presenting herself as the third way. But yeah, she's saying here the real issue, just 2 weeks after Jan 6th, is that both sides are just too tribal. That's the main issue here. That's the reason an attack on the Capitol happens, is because both sides are being way too tribal about things. It's just both sides in this.
Yeah, it's just both sides again. And the Overton window feels like it shifts so much in the past that it makes us think that both sides have this sort of equal footing, that there's a tribe, a Democratic tribe and a Republican tribe, and that they're talking about inane things, but you have to be involved in in your side's particular politics. But what they neglect is that the Overton window has shifted so that often what we're doing is we're talking about how people have rights, and one side saying they shouldn't have them, and the other side is saying they should. That's how much the Overton window has shifted. So now people are like, why can't we just have conversations about politics? It's like, we're not having conversations about politics. We're having conversations about human rights. That's what we're having conversations about. Politics is like whether or not we need to change tax policy or what we need to do in foreign policy. This is a very different thing that we've sort of started to focus on in the last 15 years. And it's changed the way we think about politics and changed the way we talk about it.
Yeah, exactly. It comes back to that kind of centrism thing to some degree as well, as that people will have the idea that, well, we can have these conversations as if they're purely political questions, and the answer must lie somewhere between the two, as if the correct response to the Holocaust was only 3 million Jews should have been killed.
Right, exactly.
The important thing is we find middle ground here. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, great way to put it. All right, so this next clip is about closing the divide.
There's so much fear that's out there. There's a lot of pain, a lot of frustration. And my hope is, I want to be really optimistic here. My hope is that by getting to a place where we can see each other once again as Americans and not one side. And you talked about tribalism, like my tribe is the good guys and your tribe is the bad guys. You're the enemy. We're not. Is that when we can get back to a place where we see each other as Americans and respect each other and go back to the fundamentals of this country, then we have the ability to have a real dialogue. And not to say that we're going to agree on everything, not to say we're not going to have fierce debates on substance around how we solve the great problems of our time. But when we come from that place of saying that we know we need to solve these problems for the sake of the people in our country, then we know we will end up in a good place with a positive outcome.
So again, they've just been talking about the attack on the Capitol here, and she's making out like both sides are too tribal about this. Both sides are as bad as each other. The answer is to find a middle ground so that you're not falling into this kind of both sides, into what either side wants, this tribalism. But that's factually untrue that the answer is a middle ground. Like one side tried to capture and kill politicians that day in order to try and halt the certification of election and steal an election. That was 2 weeks previous to this conversation. You cannot move on without accountability first. You can't just go, well, we're just going to pretend that never happened and both sides are just bad each other, when very factually there has to be some accountability for the crimes that were committed against, not just against people, but also against the very concept of democracy at the time. America doesn't heal by pretending there's a middle ground to be found between the insurrectionists and the rest of the country. It's not like they can compromise on how many Mike Pences need to be hung.
Or if he only needs to get choked to unconsciousness, right?
Yes.
So it's like, we're not going to hang him completely. We're just going to choke him out, and then he'll wake up, and then that's a compromise, I guess. All right, last clip in our toolbox. This is talking about January 6th as a teachable moment.
Speaking of learning from, other people's experiences, I think this is, what we've gone through as a country and as a people. This is a teachable moment for us. Like if you don't like what's happening around you right now, take a moment, pause, and whether it's individually, ourselves, or really collectively, stopping for that introspection to say, how did we get here?
Yeah.
And how can I be a positive force for shifting? It's not easy. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen because one person has been elected president. It happens when we collectively start to make those better choices about the impact that we are making on others, the kinds of things we're saying, the things that we're tweeting out. And, instead of just like whatever you're thinking on social media or whatever, just taking that, like, okay, just think about it. Just think about it. What kind of impact do you want to make?
So her point here is that Jan 6, well, it's a teachable moment for America because everyone in America can now take a moment to reflect on what they did to make that Capitol riot, the insurrection, happen. And that might include the things that you tweeted. But this isn't a both sides issue. January 6th wasn't caused by people on Twitter putting pronouns in their bios. It was caused by a very specific and coordinated political project to give license to encourage, and to organize an insurrection. It is not a both sides issue here.
Yeah, 100%. And listen, I remember what I said in the beginning when she's trying to rebrand herself. Listen to how she's even talking about this. Listen to how she's sidestepping any kind of real consequences for anybody who's involved. Listen to how she's using these buzzwords about like, we just need to pause and we need to reflect and we need to do the... No, what you needed to do is prosecute the people who were involved, because the people who were involved did a crime and you should prosecute the crimes. And instead what they did was they let all those people off the hook and they literally took over the government in 4 years.
Let's wrap it up with that. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you very much. You're a beautiful person.
All right, Marsh, here we are. At the end of the show, was there anything good in this?
So, yeah, I think there was. Obviously, we didn't cover these parts. It wasn't relevant to either the toolbox or to the main event. But there's parts in the conversation where they talk about sustainable farming practices. She was the congressperson from Hawaii. They talk a lot about fishing, and they talk about the dangers of overfishing and how there need to be more sustainable fishing practices. Otherwise, you won't have the fish stock there left. Yeah. You won't have the amount of fish left in the seas. That's harmful to the environment. And I think they're right. In all that kind of conversation that they have there, that's good, accurate stuff about how you need to be more responsible the way you maintain the environment around you.
I'm always amazed. I think people who even listen to our show might have listened to Joe in the past. There's a group of people I know for sure. We get messages from them. They used to listen to Joe and they stopped listening to Joe. And there's this sort of golden age Joe that people talk about, this sort of golden age where he was really hitting it. He really had a lot of great thoughts, and he had great guests, and he did great interviews, and there was a real golden age when people look back on it. I see this on their subreddit all the time. People look back to these moments. This is not one of those moments. The golden age had to happen before now, at least in 2021, because I really feel like Joe is like one of these sort of ice cream swirl cones that has a pretty passable flavor, and then salted licorice is the other flavor or whatever. So you're constantly trying to like eat your way around the bad stuff, holding your nose, just trying to find the good bits. And there's so few good bits here. And you can really see who he's becoming. You can really see who he's gonna become in the future, and especially based on the guests. So we still haven't hit any of this golden Joe that I've really wanted to find. This episode is not an example of that at all.
No, I think you're right. Well, that is it for the show this week. Remember, you can access more than half an hour of bonus content every week from as little as $1 an episode. You can do that by subscribing at patreon.com/No Rogan. You'll also get early access to every episode, and you'll get those ad-free. Meanwhile, you can hear more from Cecil at Cognitive Dissonance and Citation Needed. And you can hear more from me at Skeptics with a K and the Skeptic Podcast. And we will be back next week for a little more of the No Rogan experience.
If you love the show, please rate and share it. If you want to get in touch with us, become a patron or check out the show notes, go to norogan.com, KNOWROGAN.com.